A lot of the time when people ask about healing certain bosses or covering specific mechanics, usually single target fights, I answer with something along the lines of, oh, it's just normal cooldown cycling. But I realize if you're new to Mistweaver or new to healer in general, you probably don't know exactly what I'm talking about. So in this video, I wanted to go over what CD cycling is for Mistweaver and how I approach cooldown planning. This is obviously coming from the perspective of Mistweaver, but you can approach it with other healers in a similar way. First off, you should get familiar with the healing profile for your spec. For Mistweaver, we are very strong in fights with multiple targets since we can utilize Way of the Crane, which is very efficient and strong healing. However, we can struggle in single target fights since without the funnel, we're almost entirely reliant on our cooldown management and our mana. So if you're not utilizing your cooldowns enough or you're using them incorrectly, you can fall behind or become overly reliant on casted spells, which will run you out of mana. So, considering we are super strong in multi-target fights, this is telling us that most of our cooldown use will be more important on single-target fights, and we should mostly be okay to hold cooldowns for when we are in low target count situations. So next we are going to look at our cooldowns, their strengths, and any weaknesses or limitations that they have. For Mistweaver, we have Life Cocoon, Revival, Celestial Conduit, and Chi-Ji. Life Cocoon is a large absorb shield when used on DPS and on healer specs, and it's really good at preventing one-shots or other heavy damage intake like dots. It also allows you to lean more heavily into your damage conversion spells since you can effectively remove one person from the split by using Life Cocoon on them at full health. It doesn't work great for tanks due to the health differences, but depending on the key level, it can be used to prevent part of a tank buster or maybe help prevent a one-shot when the tank is cycling their own cooldowns. With the current talent setup, Life Cocoon is around a 55-second cooldown, so it can be used really often. Revival is a bursty AoE heal that also functions as a mass dispel. In 5-mans, this is basically a group-wide lay on hands, but it is only one instance of healing, so you have to be precise. Celestial Conduit is one of our burstier heals. This is a channeled ability that does a good amount of healing to counter the incoming damage, but it can also be used for other things. Celestial Conduit gives you cooldown reduction on some of your very important spells like Thunder Focus Tea, Life Cocoon, and Rising Sun Kick. So this can be used either for the healing it provides or to utilize the cooldown reduction depending on the fight timers and the requirements for the fights. Sometimes you'll be able to use it for damage, sometimes you can use it for cooldown reduction, sometimes you'll have to use it as a personal defensive because it does give you DR that lingers after the cast, and sometimes you're going to have to hold it for the actual healing that it gives. A few more things about Conduit to keep in mind. You can use your utility spells mid-channel without cancelling your cast. Tiger's Lust, Thunder Focus Tea, Roll, Transcendence, Transcendence Transfer, Detox, Leg Sweep, Paralysis, Ring of Peace, and your combat pots, and weirdly enough, Touch of Death. The tooltip says non-damaging or healing abilities, but Touch of Death is just coded a little funny, I guess. This is particularly useful for pulls where you are global locked between healing, DPSing, dispelling, and CCing. An example of this would be the beginning pulls in Pit of Saron or the first area in Seat of the Triumvirate. Both of those you are really GCD locked, so this is useful to know. You will also not be interrupted by silences or kicks while using Conduit. This means that you can use it before clearing your glaive on the second boss of Magisters or on Croth for the Screeches without being interrupted. This is also one of our shortest range healing abilities, capping out at 20 yards. There are some fights where if you're on opposite sides of the boss, and both in melee range, you may be out of range of the people you're trying to heal, so keep in mind any positional or movement requirements on the fights. And finally, we have Chi-Ji. This one offers a bit of a choice. You can use either Gift of the Celestials or Jade Bond. Gift of the Celestials offers you a 1-minute cooldown and a 12-second duration, and Jade Bond offers you a 2-minute cooldown, 24-second duration, as well as increased Chi Cocoon sizes, additional healing from Gust of Mist, and when your Chi Cocoons break, they apply Enveloping Mist. Little Chi-Ji is a bit weak, especially in single target. It is mainly used for the shields and instant enveloping mist application, and it's often paired with something like Life Cocoon or personal defensives to make up for some of the lack of power that it has. With Big Chi-Ji, you can utilize all of the same parts of Little Chi-Ji, but it will be more impactful as well as be lasting twice as long. The main choice here is dependent on fight timers or dungeon requirements, which is what we will be getting to in a moment. Other things to consider is everything else that you have in your group. This is ring defensives like AMZ, Darkness, Rally, your personal defensives or other utility like personal walls or things like Sack or Bop, and then trinkets that can function as externals that are either providing shields or damage reduction. Another thing to keep in mind is which races you have. Being able to use Dwarf or Shadow Meld for mechanics can negate entire mechanics sometimes, but it usually just removes one person from the healing split on your spells. This will vary comp to comp, so it's good to keep in mind the things that you have in your toolkit that don't necessarily belong to you but still can contribute to group survivability. It's also good to know what the damage type of the hard mechanics are, so you know if AMZ or other damage-specific cooldowns will actually work for the mechanic you want to cover. Usually we try to pair raid cooldowns or walls with whatever cooldown I have that is weak for the current situation, so Chi-Ji, for example, in single target usually gets paired with AMZ or Zephyr, and then depending on the fight and the timers, I may not have anything for the group and we're only sending walls or a group cooldown. So for Mistweaver, we do have a decision between our weaker 1-minute cooldown or a stronger 2-minute cooldown, and this decision is made when you look at the boss timers as well as the damage intake or healing requirements. When starting a new season and a new dungeon pool, I usually default to Gift of the Celestials since it's a shorter timer and early season keys are less dangerous and have lower healing requirements than mid to end season. So if the healing requirement ramps up in higher keys or the boss timers match up, you can swap to Jade Bond as necessary. Gift is also just a little bit more flexible due to the shorter cooldown. So I will just play my default build, and then as we progress through the season, if certain bosses or trash packs stand out as difficult, I make adjustments as needed. So for Mistweaver, we have a lot of cooldowns, and they're all pretty short, so these basically just take turns handling mechanics or damage intake. So when you're approaching a boss fight or an encounter, you want to take note of how many people are being targeted by the mechanic and how hard it hits, as well as any potential overlaps, though this is usually only an issue in higher key levels with longer boss fights. And you'll handle things differently depending on how many people are injured at a time and how hard they're getting hit. There is a chance that there's no actual major mechanic or sudden damage intake, and those are usually rot fights where there's a relatively even amount of damage happening for the whole fight. When it's a fight that is pretty even, constant damage, I will try to use my shortest cooldowns first, so Life Cocoon, Chi-Ji, and Celestial Conduit, and then just use them as they come up if you're in danger. You may be holding some of these shorter or longer depending on what group or personal defensives are used, but short to long is the general approach for cooldowns for rot fights. So now we know what our cooldowns do and about how much healing they provide. We know what the boss does and about how hard that hits, so now we can just kind of fit puzzle pieces together. The best way to do this, I would think, is to use some bosses from this season to show how we assign things, or at least how I decide to use healing cooldowns, or if I'll even use a cooldown at all. Some fights are very scripted and we will use the exact same abilities at the exact same spot every single time. Sometimes it's a little bit more loose and it's more of just kind of playing it by ear. The first example is Veximus in Algathar Academy. I think this one is good because it has a few mechanics, but it is consistent with its timers. So the two main mechanics are the Mana Bombs and the Arcane Fissure. There's also a tank frontal that does a lot of damage to them, but that's handled almost exclusively by the tank. The Mana Bombs will go on 3 people. It does pretty heavy ticking damage for the duration of the debuff with a larger hit at the end when it expires. This does a lot of damage at a higher level and requires people to be healthy enough to survive the pop. The Arcane Fissure is a big AoE damage event that will push you back and spawn some circles then that you have to dodge, but you are mainly concerned with the damage intake. The key to this fight is handling the overlaps. Every other set of Mana Bombs will be paired with an Arcane Fissure, followed shortly after the expiration. The Mana Bombs with the Fissure overlap is the most dangerous part of the fight, and where you're most likely to die, so that is where we are going to be sending bigger cooldowns. In the case of Veximus, Chi-Ji is the weakest cooldown that we have. It provides small shields and a small amount of healing, and you don't have time to utilize the Blackout Kick or Gust of Mist interaction due to the short duration on the Mana Bombs, as well as the healing that Chi-Ji does compared to the damage you take from the Mana Bomb. This means that I usually pair Chi-Ji with my Litany Trinket, or personal defensives, sometimes a raid cooldown as well. For the first Mana Bomb, I am using Chi-Ji and basically just using it to apply the 3 enveloping mists to the bomb targets, as well as some of the benefit of the shields. I use my free Blackout Kick stack and then I leave melee to drop my puddle and continue to heal with casted spells and Soothing Mist for the damage reduction on the squishiest target. I also use Fortifying Brew and we use Blur and IBF. It does sound like a lot, but remember Chi-Ji is pretty weak on this fight. The next Mana Bomb is paired with an Arcane Fissure, so I will be using a bigger cooldown to top people after the pot but before the fissure. We did get lucky and got a pre-AMS on Yoda, so there's only 2 bomb targets here. We also used scales to help with the bomb damage into the fissure since it lasts long enough for both, and I still use conduit and litany since our 2 target healing outside of cooldowns isn't the best, but that was a little overkill. After the fissure, you have some time to top people basically just through ancient teachings in your hots. For the next bombs, I just spot healed. I wanted to hold a cooldown for the overlap, and we did have 3 targets here, so I would usually use something, but one of the targets was a Death Knight who can Death Strike, so I really don't worry about them too much. For the second fissure, I use GG for the shields and enveloping mist on a couple people, and then I wait to see who actually gets the mechanic. We pre-AMS 1 and I use Life Cocoon on our evoker, and then just heal myself due to the personal healing scaling. For this one set of solo bombs, I basically only have Revival, which is what I do use, but since it's only one instance of healing, I asked for personal defensive, so Blur and Evoker Stagger were used, and then I just healed myself. Since that was a solo bomb set, I have time between the blow up and then the next set of bombs, so I didn't need to use Revival afterwards. I just went ahead and used it beforehand so that people actually lived the hit, just to be safe. For the third fissure overlap, I'm just applying enveloping mist for the bomb into the fissure, and then we use AMZ to cover the actual explosion of both of those. Since trying to fit all 3 people into the AMZ is a little crowded, we do have one person stand out occasionally, so in that case it was our evoker. Ideally, him and I would have swapped spots, but I was already in the AMS, so I just went ahead and used my Soothing Mist DR on him. This is just a set of solo bombs, so I went ahead and used my GG and my litany because GG is not going to do too much by itself, like I mentioned earlier. For the fourth overlap, I have Life Cocoon for myself, Blur from RDH, and we pre-AMS, so I only have 2 targets, and then I'm just using Conduit to top us before the fissure. When I use Conduit, I try to time it so that I have a couple of Conduit ticks during the mana bomb, and then a couple of ticks into the fissure, partially because I just want to make sure that people are topped, partially because I also get the personal damage reduction from my Conduit, so it'll cover both mechanics. And for the final set of mana bombs, we just use 1 Scales Charge and some spot healing. On this fight, as a whole, I could have used Life Cocoon more frequently, and we didn't use Darkness in this run, but I was kind of holding on to things just in case someone got unlucky with getting a lot of bombs or the tank needed it for his frontal. This was our first attempt on this boss as 22, so we definitely can improve some of our timings and some of our group defensive use. For Emberdon in Windrunner's Fire, the 2 mechanics that we have to deal with are the Flaming Updraft, which is heavy damage on 2 targets, and the Burning Gale, which is a 20-second AoE phase with dodging frontals and tornadoes. What we decided to do once we got to this on a higher level was actually have the Evoker use personals on the tornadoes if he gets it, instead of the Burning Gale. Single target healing is a big mana drain, and you're just barely able to do enough single targets to keep them alive, and the Burning Gale is a little bit more manageable since it's less damage but on more targets over a longer period of time. For this fight, you will get 2 sets of tornado debuffs and then go into the center for the intermission. You get the intermission once about every 30 seconds. For the tornadoes, you're pretty much just spot healing and not sending any cooldowns into it outside of the Evoker or other squishy class defensives. For the first Burning Gale, I use my Litany, Life Cocoon on our Evoker since they're not using a defensive, and then finish with Conduit and some spot healing if needed. This is another dungeon where I would take your 2-minute GG, so I would run Jade Bond in here instead of Gift of the Celestials. You can do it with Gift of the Celestials, I have done it before, but Jade Bond has felt a lot comfier so far. So instead of having GG for every intermission, except for like the last 1 or 2, just because of the timers being off slightly, you will have it for the 2nd and the 4th. So this is us heading into the 2nd Burning Gale after this next set of tornadoes. This is going to be my GG as well as my personal defensive. Now this is Jade Bond GG, so this is actually a powerful bird, big bird if you will. So you can utilize the Gust of Mist and Blackout Kick interaction a bit, as well as the Rising Sun Kick and whatnot. You are also going to get the Enveloping Mist on your breaks when your Chi Cocoons break. I also use Life Cocoon on our Evoker once again. You should have this about every intermission, it should be available. You might not have it in the same spot every time, but you should have a life cocoon for every intermission, and I usually use it on our evoker. If your evoker doesn't get picked by the flaming updraft enough so that he's actually sitting on charges of defensives, then you can have him use a defensive in the intermission and then use a life cocoon on someone else. For our third intermission, I have my Litany and my Conduit available again. I will end up getting Life Cocoon towards the end, just because of the cooldown reduction here, but I don't end up using it and I just send Revival instead. We also use Darkness here, which I'm trying to stand in, but it is a little weird due to frontals and tornadoes. I also wanted to get on the same side as my DPS for my Conduit since it's short range. I also went ahead and used my pot here. I thought that I had already used it, but I didn't, so I just went ahead and used it for these tornadoes into the 4th Burning Gale. Because I don't have Revival here, all I really have is Chi-Chi in about 5 seconds. I use my Life Cocoon, we drop AMZ, but then we have to get out because of the frontal, and then I should be able to stabilize with Chi-Chi here. The intention of this video is to help you learn how to plan your cooldowns for Mistweaver and to get you thinking about boss timers, group cooldowns, and damage patterns. So I hope that this was helpful. If you have any comments or questions, feel free to ask down below, and I will see you next time. Thanks for watching.